أيضا صاروخ فالق وهو صاروخ باليستي أرض بحر، يليه أيضا صاروخ مندب واحد.
All right, let's sit down with a cuppa and have a proper natter about this rather intriguing bit of news that's been floating about regarding China and the Yemeni armed forces. It's the sort of story that's got more layers than an onion, and while it's tricky to pin down all the facts, there's enough here to chew over and ponder. The word on the street, or at least according to some whispers reaching OMT News, is that China's decided to throw caution to the wind, brushing off the threat of US sanctions and retribution, and has been quietly slipping some military kit to the Yemeni armed forces. This, they say, is all tied up with the latest round of chaos in Yemen, sparked by what's being called a fresh war declared by none other than Donald Trump, who's back in the White House as of March 2025. Now, the tale goes that China's been able to sail its ships through the Red Sea without so much as a sideways glance from the Yemeni Navy, and that's supposedly one of the perks of a hush-hush deal struck with the folks running things in Sana'a. It's a fascinating little puzzle, isn't it? Since the Red Sea turned into a proper hornet's nest, kicked off by Israel's heavy-handed operations in Gaza back in late 2023, most ships have been dodging drones and missiles left, right and centre, but not the Chinese ones. They've been gliding through like it's a Sunday stroll. And the chatter is that this immunity's down to Beijing sending weapons and gear to bolster the Yemeni military. If there's truth to it, it'd position China as a hefty player in the Middle East, quietly balancing out the US's more boisterous moves in the region. At OMT News, we're dedicated to bringing you sharp, no-nonsense analysis on the conflicts shaping Palestine, Yemen and beyond. In a world where propaganda drowns out truth and narratives are manipulated to fit political agendas, we refuse to take the easy route. We don't do spin. We don't take sides. We dig deep, call out hypocrisy, and break down the complexities others ignore. But independent reporting like this doesn't thrive without your support. If you value balanced, unfiltered discussion, don't let efforts to silence voices like ours win. Like and share this video to push back against the algorithm and IDF internet bots. Subscribe to stay ahead of the conversation. Let's unpack this Red Sea business a bit more, shall we? It's been a right mess since the Yemeni armed forces started their blockade, which they reckon is a stand against what they call a genocide in Gaza, an operation they insist didn't just pop up out of nowhere on 7th of October 2023, but has deeper roots. They've been lobbing attacks at ships they link to Israel or Western powers, sinking a couple, hijacking another, and generally making life miserable for anyone trying to get through to the Suez Canal. We're talking about a waterway that handles something like 15% of the world's sea trade, so it's no small thing costs have shot up. Shipping firms are rerouting round Africa, and the whole global supply chain's taken a knock. Yet, amidst all this, Chinese vessels have been oddly untouched. Not a single report of them being targeted, which is peculiar when you think about it. The speculation doing the rounds is that this isn't just luck, there's a deal in play. The story goes that China's been funneling weapons, maybe drones or anti-ship missiles, to the Yemeni armed forces, and in return, their ships get a free pass. It's a tidy arrangement if it's real. China keeps its trade routes humming along, and the Yemeni military gets a leg up in their scrap with the West. But it's all whispers at this point. No one's waving a contract about or snapping photos of crates stamped "Made in China" unloading in Yemen's ports. Now, why would China stick its neck out like this? Well, it's worth looking at the bigger picture, and that brings us to the rather frosty state of affairs between Beijing and Washington. Since Trump swept back into office for his second go-round, he's made no secret of his mission to put a dent in China's economic rise. He's been banging on about protecting what he calls US manufacturing dominance, slapping hefty tariffs on Chinese companies and their goods, making it a right pain for them to export to the States. According to him, these moves have forced American firms worth a staggering $4 trillion to pack up their factories and bring production back home. It's a bold claim, and whether the numbers stack up is anyone's guess, but it's certainly put the wind up Beijing. So, the thinking goes that China's decided to hit back not with tariffs of their own, but by stirring the pot elsewhere. Arming the Yemeni armed forces could be their way of bogging the US down in Yemen, keeping Trump's administration busy with military headaches, while China keeps its own house in order. It's a crafty bit of strategy if it's true indirect, deniable, and keeps their hands looking clean while the Americans sweat it out in the Middle East. Let's dig a bit deeper into this supposed deal, shall we? The idea is that China's not just sending over a few rifles, They're allegedly supplying some proper high-end kit, maybe even intelligence to go with it. There's talk that this could explain how the Yemeni armed forces have managed to pull off some surprisingly sharp attacks lately, like strikes on US aircraft carriers with what looks like pinpoint accuracy. Now, the Americans are quick to say none of these hits have landed, but the precision's got folk wondering where the tech's coming from. Iran's usually the go-to suspect. They've been backing the Yemeni armed forces for years with weapons and training, but adding China into the mix changes the game. If Beijing's in on it, they'd likely be doing it through back channels, maybe piggybacking on Iran's networks to keep things quiet. China's got a track record of playing it smart with arms sales, think drones to Saudi Arabia or missiles to the UAE, so slipping some gear to Yemen wouldn't be out of character, though it'd be a riskier move given the international spotlight on the region. Interestingly, while all this has been going on, China's been careful not to openly provoke the US. You remember how President Trump returned for a second term, ramping up trade tariffs on China, trying to squeeze their economy and push manufacturing back to America? Well, it seems China decided to respond subtly, opting for quiet military support to Yemen instead of outright economic retaliation or confrontation. By doing this, they're indirectly bogging down American resources in yet another messy conflict, all without getting their own hands visibly dirty. But it's not like China's involvement in Yemen popped up overnight. Actually, China's been involved there for decades, going way back to the Cold War days. Back in the 50s and 60s, China built solid relationships with various Yemeni governments, offering economic aid and a bit of military hardware here and there. Throughout the years, especially in the 1990s and 2000s, Yemen openly bought military gear from China, things like patrol boats, missiles, rifles, and ammunition. These were straightforward deals, fully acknowledged internationally. When Yemen descended into chaos around 2014 and the civil war really got nasty, China maintained an official neutral stance. Publicly, they supported the internationally recognized government backed by Saudi Arabia, but privately, Beijing kept talking with the Yemeni armed forces controlling Sana'a, playing a delicate balancing game. China's diplomats regularly pushed for peace talks and humanitarian assistance, carefully making sure neither side saw them as enemies. This diplomatic balancing act let China maintain a friendly face with everyone involved, which explains why their ships aren't being targeted today. Over the last few years, these quiet relationships appear to have deepened. Although China officially denies involvement in arming the Yemeni armed forces, Western intelligence suggests that, at the very least, Chinese authorities are turning a blind eye to the flow of their military hardware into Yemen. This could involve complex third-party deals or even unofficial back-channel agreements. Whatever the exact arrangement, the outcome is clear. The Yemeni armed forces are getting advanced weapons components from China, indirectly but steadily. So, looking at the bigger picture, you can see how China's subtle, under-the-radar involvement in Yemen fits into their broader foreign policy. Rather than openly confronting the West or their regional allies, China quietly exerts influence by making discreet deals. Their shipping remains safe, their trade flows uninterrupted, and their diplomatic standing solid, pretty clever when you think about it. Meanwhile, the Yemeni armed forces get powerful new capabilities that help them resist Western-aligned forces, all without China openly breaking international rules. What's really got people scratching their heads is why the Yemeni armed forces haven't turned on China. If they're so dead set on disrupting Western shipping, why let Chinese ships sail by unscathed? One answer could be gratitude. If China's kit is helping them hold their own against US airstrikes and naval ops, they might see Beijing as a mate worth keeping on side. Another angle is pure pragmatism. China's not backing Israel or bombing Yemen, so there's no beef to settle. But the secret deal theory adds a twist. Maybe it's a straight swap, weapons for safe passage. It'd make sense for China, who've got a massive stake in keeping the Red Sea open for their trade with Europe. About a third of their container traffic goes that way. With the US and its allies tied up chasing drones and launching strikes, China could be quietly securing its own interests without breaking a sweat. Of course, we've got to take all this with a pinch of salt. The info's coming from OMT News and Whispers on X, not exactly a trove of verified documents. China's not daft. They'd know getting caught arming the Yemeni armed forces could bring a world of pain, from sanctions to a PR nightmare. They've kept stum about any involvement, and the Yemeni side's not exactly shouting it from the rooftops either. Plus, there's the question of control. Once the weapons are handed over, Who's to say the Yemeni armed forces wouldn't use them however they fancy? They're not known for playing by anyone's rules but their own. Still, the fact that Chinese ships are dodging the chaos while everyone else is ducking and diving does raise an eyebrow. It's the kind of coincidence that's hard to ignore. Zooming out a bit, this fits into a broader pattern of China flexing its muscles in the Middle East, not with fanfare, but with a steady, calculated hand. They've been building ties across the region for years, from oil deals with Saudi Arabia to port projects in Djibouti. Supporting the Yemeni armed forces, if they're at it, would be a bolder step, but not entirely out of left field. It'd be less about ideology and more about cold, hard interests keeping trade flowing, countering US pressure, and carving out a bigger slice of influence. Meanwhile, Trump's push to hammer Yemen with airstrikes ramping up since March 2025 plays into the narrative of US belligerence that China could be looking to exploit. The Yemeni armed forces, caught in the middle, get a boost to their arsenal and a chance to stick it to the West, whether it's American carriers or Israeli-linked ships. Ultimately, this partnership between China and the Yemeni armed forces isn't about ideological friendship or moral alliances. It's pragmatic, strategic, and carefully calculated. It lets China secure vital trade routes, gives them leverage in a strategic region, and subtly counters US and Western influence. Meanwhile, the Yemeni armed forces get desperately needed military supplies that boost their position in a protracted and challenging conflict. It's a partnership that shows how today's geopolitics often work behind closed doors, in quiet arrangements and mutual understandings, rather than big, noisy confrontations. And considering how this relationship has evolved over the years, it's probably one we'll keep seeing play out quietly, yet significantly for a long time yet.